Imagine a poker table filled with seasoned players. Among them, an elderly man with white hair and a calm demeanor. He didn't seem like a threat at all, starting with his appearance, a stark contrast to the youthful energy of the other players. Around him, the young champions were joking around and looking at him with disdain, as if the old man were just another face in the crowd, there to take up space. Deep down, the most likely scenario was that none of them were really interested in what he had to say or do. After all, he was just a retired old guy, right? Who could have imagined that he, quiet and unassuming, had more tricks up his sleeve than anyone else at the table? How could such an apparently harmless old man possibly turn the game around with a move that left everyone speechless? What no one knew was that this old man wasn't here by chance, nor was he just a spectator. He knew exactly what he was doing. Though poker is a card game, there's something much bigger at stake. Perceptions, expectations, human flaws. The moment of shock came when the old man, seemingly harmless, made an unexpected move that no one, not even the most experienced players, would have dared to imagine. The table fell silent all of a sudden. The champions who had been mocking him now found themselves at a loss for words, unsure how to react. What he did was more than just playing a strategic hand. He read the table, observed every move, understood the nuances of the game, and then, with a simple gesture, turned the tide in his favor. What was even more impressive was the reaction of the other players. The silence that filled the room was deafening, and even the most famous champions were speechless. How did this happen? How could someone who was underestimated and considered irrelevant by everyone there pull off such a precise move that changed everything? This game turnaround brings up a crucial point. In poker, as in life, true talent isn't just in the visible skills. It's in reading the environment, in having the patience to wait for the right moment, and in the ability to play the players, not just the cards. The old man wasn't just a poker player, he was a master at understanding people's motivations, their emotions, their weaknesses. When you underestimate someone, it's easy to forget that behind the appearance, there might be a sharp mind, a keen eye, and a lifetime of experience capable of flipping the game on its head. That moment was just the beginning, and what came next would be even more impressive. What this old man had learned throughout his life prepared him for this great feat. But his journey to this point was far from easy. Let's dive a little deeper to understand who he really was and what motivated him to get here. Stay tuned. Before he became known as the Silent Challenger, before he made headlines in poker forums and became the subject of conversation in WhatsApp groups among the most experienced players, he was just Mr. Alfredo. Retired for over a decade, his face carried the marks of time, and in his eyes, there was a calmness that only someone who has lived a lot could maintain. He lived in a modest house in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and for a long time, he was known only as the widower who played dominoes in the town square. He didn't wear flashy clothes, he didn't rush anywhere, and he rarely spoke more than necessary. He'd say hello to everyone, stop by the little grocery store, head back home, and sometimes watch a game on TV. That was his routine. Simple, predictable, quiet. And maybe that's exactly why no one suspected what he was about to become. Mr. Alfredo never had any ambition to be famous. What he really wanted was to fill his time with something meaningful. He'd already raised children, buried friends, and faced pains that most people wouldn't be able to endure standing up. But he never played the victim. His life was made of silence and patience, but also of observation. He always noticed everything. When someone lied, he'd spot it in a second, though he never said a word. When someone needed help, he'd show up uninvited. That was always the case. But the world doesn't always value this kind of person. Many saw him as a man who was already out of the game, just waiting for time to pass until the next doctor's appointment. In a society that idolizes youth and speed, no one imagines that a man with slow steps could be 2 moves ahead. And that's how he went unnoticed for years, even by his own friends. At the local club where friendly games were held on Friday nights, he was more known for the coffee he brought than the moves he made. He played for fun, it's true. He never entered the club intending to impress anyone. He enjoyed the conversation, the sound of chips, the challenge of thinking. But the other players, many of them younger or with egos inflated by past victories, saw Alfredo as a detail on the green felt, a background character, sometimes even as dead weight, ever. Heard that? A guy who's just taking up space at the table, as they'd say. The exchanged glances, the suppressed smiles when he made a mistake, and even the whispered comments like, "Isn't it time for him to go home?" Common things in the poker world, where arrogance walks hand in hand with insecurity. But no one there knew what he carried inside. While many sought fame in regional tournaments or bragged on social media, Mr. Alfredo did the opposite. He studied in silence, he observed, he learned from others' mistakes and, most importantly, from his own. No one noticed, but he had already figured out something crucial. In poker, as in life, haste is the enemy of precision. And that's pure gold, my friend. Many players make mistakes because they play in a rush, act on impulse, let their egos decide. Alfredo, on the other hand, waited. And while he waited, he took notes. Mentally, of course, because the little notebook he only used at home away from prying eyes. There, away from the spotlight, he began to build something no one imagined. Those who underestimated him made a classic mistake. They judged the book by its cover, or better yet, the player by his age. But those who have lived know, sometimes, it's the ones who speak the least that observe the most. And those who observe the most, sooner or later, find the right moment to act. Alfredo wasn't just a distracted old man. He was a man with decades of emotional experience, active listening, and human reading. His mind worked like a radar, identifying patterns, behaviors, tensions in the air. Fine-tuned stuff you don't learn from a YouTube tutorial. And all of that, this silent baggage, was being cultivated day by day, between bitter coffees and low-risk games at the club. A cycle that seemed uneventful, until something changed. It's curious to think that so many saw Alfredo, but few really saw him. And that, in itself, says a lot about how people relate today. They judge quickly, forget to listen, and miss the chance to learn from those who have much to teach. But the game was about to change. And it would change in a way no one there could have predicted. Because even while playing casually, the old man had a different look that night. A detail that almost went unnoticed, but would say a lot very soon. The life he had before had prepared him, silently, for what was about to happen. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest trump card of all. But to understand that, we need to go back a little, to the day when poker first entered his life. And it wasn't by chance. They say that the great encounters in life don't come with an announcement. There's no fanfare, no spotlight. They simply happen, almost always in an unpretentious way. And that's exactly how poker entered Mr. Alfredo's life. No invitation to a tournament, no digital influence, no flashy advertising or viral videos. It was a simple invitation on a stuffy Tuesday afternoon, right at the corner bar. Zay, a longtime friend, came in with that casual attitude of someone who knows he'll get a no. but asks anyway. "Hey, Alfredo, want to play a little game tonight? Nothing serious, just some cards, a beer, and a few chips to liven things up." Normally he would have turned down something like that, but he hesitated for a moment. He thought, why not? He was tired of the monotony of his days, of the TV playing the same news, of the long silences that filled the house ever since. His wife passed. He agreed. No big expectations. Just to hang out with some friends and clear his mind. Little did he know that that game, in that poorly lit bar, would be the first step of a journey that would completely change the way he saw the world. That night's game was simple, almost rustic. A wobbly wooden table, a deck of cards, stained, with the grease from pastries and chips that looked more like painted bottle caps. But in the middle of jokes and the teasing typical of lifelong friends, Alfredo felt something different. A kind of vibe, a good tension in the air. He didn't quite understand the rules. He made mistakes when it came to betting, and he got lost in the terms. But something inside him was triggered. That feeling of being in a silent battlefield, where everything is said without a word. It hooked him. To him, poker wasn't just a game. It was a mental dance, a duel of glances, of held breath, of bets that spoke more than the players were willing to reveal. And that stirred him in a way nothing had in a long time. In the days that followed, Alfredo began attending the group's games more often. At first, just to kill time. But soon enough, something in him woke up. A genuine interest, a persistent curiosity. He wanted to understand why he lost that hand, what that play meant, how someone could bluff without giving anything away on their face. And then, without anyone noticing, the silent retiree began to study. He went to the town's used bookstore and bought an old book on poker strategies, one of those yellowed, musty-smelling books with technical language. Then, he found YouTube videos, specialized forums, and even international tournament streams. He dove in, not for the competition, but for the fascination. He was enchanted by the game's complexity, by the layers behind every decision. It's interesting how motivation can sprout from the least expected places. Sometimes all we need is a new stimulus, a card game, a different conversation, a walk off the beaten path. Alfredo, who until then had only been thinking of filling his time, was now learning something new. And here's a valuable lesson. Curiosity is the best antidote to stagnation. It's the spark that ignites the engine of reinvention. And when cultivated with patience and depth, it becomes long-term fuel. Alfredo was unknowingly reading about behavioral psychology. He was, in practice, applying game theory, risk analysis, emotional self-control. And all of that coming from a man who barely knew how to use a smartphone. You've got to admit that's inspiring, right? What's beautiful about this phase is that no one was watching. There was no audience, no external expectations. It was just him and himself on a quiet journey of discovery. And when that happens, my friend, something powerful is born. Because learning driven by passion, not obligation, is the kind of knowledge that sticks. Alfredo knew that, even without putting it into words. He didn't want to be the best at the table. He wanted to understand the game. He wanted to understand the logic behind the moves, decode the repeating patterns, explore the invisible paths of a good hand. And that, over time, would turn him into someone who didn't just play, but thought about poker in a way few others could. Little by little, he began applying what he studied. He'd stop to analyze past hands, understand why certain players would bet big at specific times, pay attention to micro-expressions, a furrowed brow, a cough out of place, a glance that passed too quickly. And he wrote it all down. Not in a formal notebook, but in an old notepad, where he wrote in his crooked handwriting, "Game with Carlos, visible bluff in the corner of his eye. Zay nervous when holding a pair of aces, raises 2. Early. Never trust Joan's excitement. He always overplays." These observations became his compass. He understood that poker, more than a game of luck or technique, was a game of people. And people he understood like few others. This slow and meticulous learning process gradually refined his skills. There was no rush. He didn't have anything to prove to anyone. He didn't compare himself to the younger players, nor let their teasing get to him. In fact, he'd even laugh along, as if knowing more than he let on. While others spent time memorizing plays from famous YouTubers, Alfredo was there deciphering human patterns, and that made all the difference. Because in poker, like in life, those who understand others' behavior always have the upper hand. And the most curious part? He didn't even realize he was getting good. He was just getting more and more interested, and that was enough. One of the defining moments of this phase happened on a rainy night when one of his friends decided to bring a new player to the table. A younger guy, quick-talking, with a competitive look. He claimed to have won online tournaments and entered the game with an air of superiority. When he saw Alfredo at the table, he dismissed him. "Oh, you play too? That's cool. I like when there are people of all ages," he said, with that condescending tone of someone who already thought he had won before the game even started. What happened next was symbolic. Alfredo, with his precise and silent reading, beat the young man 3 times in a row, without making a fuss. At the end of the night, while collecting the chips, he simply said, "Thanks for the lesson." That was the moment the friends began to look at him in a new light. And so, without making any noise, without seeking applause, Alfredo kept growing. His passion turned into discipline, his curiosity turned into study, and his calmness turned into strategy. This phase was crucial, not only for poker, but for his own life. It brought back a spark that time seemed to have extinguished. It gave purpose to his days. It renewed his connections. And more than anything, it showed him that it's never too late to start. What started as a pastime became a project. What seemed like a distraction became destiny. And the next step was already drawn, even though no one knew. Because after all that time just learning, Alfredo was about to put everything to the test. And what would happen next? Well, that's going to surprise you. If there's one phase everyone wants to skip, but no one escapes, it's this one, the phase of setbacks. And for Mr. Alfredo, it wasn't any different. After the initial excitement with the game, the thrill of studying, writing down patterns and learning strategies, came the weight of reality. The learning curve of poker doesn't forgive, especially when you're playing with people hungry for victory. In the first few weeks, the losses were seen as part of the process, but over time, they began to sting. Lost hands due to sheer naivete, bets that seemed foolproof but ended in the laughter of his friends, and that silent frustration that only those who've ever believed in something too strongly can truly understand. He began to realize that knowing the theory wasn't enough. It was like studying airplane mechanics without ever having flown one. In practice, everything seemed faster, more chaotic, more unpredictable. Mr. Alfredo tried to apply the concepts he had been studying, but he stumbled on the timing of his moves, got lost in the signals of his opponents, and sometimes made bad decisions just to see what would happen. A poorly executed move here, a rushed read there, and the chips went down the drain like water through a sieve. The worst part? The subtle humiliation, the snickers from his friends, the poisoned jokes. Alfredo's a good guy, but he needs to learn that poker isn't dominoes, Juan once said, with that typical arrogance of someone who never had to learn anything with humility. The old man pretended not to care. He responded with a half smile, as if he knew he was still learning. But inside, it hurt. It hurt more than he wanted to admit. At home, no longer excited like in the early days, he started questioning himself. "Am I kidding myself thinking I can learn this now?" he thought, as he mentally replayed every mistake from the previous night. And here's an important point. Every growth process goes through this valley. It's a low point where doubt feels stronger than desire. Many quit here, not because they're not good enough, but because they can't handle the emotional toll of feeling small. Alfredo, despite all his life wisdom, also fell prey to this feeling. One night in particular stood out. A decisive hand. He thought he had the right read, bet big, confident. But his opponent was bluffing like a master. Result, Alfredo took a big hit. He lost everything in that round. And the comments came like invisible punches. I knew he wouldn't last long. It was just a flash in the pan. Better go back to bingo. That was too much. When he got home, he didn't even want to eat. He sat on the porch chair, looked up at the dark sky, and thought about quitting. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should accept that it's run its course. And that, my friend, is a pain many people carry. The feeling of being too late to start something new. The limiting belief that there's a right age to start over. As if life were a race with a fixed finish line. The truth is, Alfredo wasn't just losing chips. He was also losing a bit of the faith he had regained in himself. And that's the cruelest part of setbacks. They don't just knock you out in the game, they knock you out inside. His friends weren't helping. Even those who were rooting for him secretly thought the old man was dreaming too big. They began to leave him out of the more competitive rounds. Alfredo just plays for fun, they'd say. And he heard it, silently, swallowing it down. And once again, he questioned whether it was worth continuing to insist on a space that didn't seem to have been made for him. What few realized was how much those losses were teaching him. Alfredo was, unknowingly, going through the phase that forges the strongest players. It wasn't just about losing, it was about resisting the laughter, the disdain, the loneliness of trying to become someone different in a place where no one bets on you. He was living, in practice, what many would call the desert phase. That stretch of the journey where you walk, and only find sand and wind in your face. No sign that you're on the right path, no applause, no encouragement. Just you and yourself. And this, though painful, is the phase that separates the curious from the committed. Even on nights when he lost it all, Alfredo kept a habit, writing it down. He didn't let anything slip. He recorded what he felt, what he thought, what he realized too late. He started to notice he was being swallowed by the rush, that his anxiety to get things right was messing up his reads. And look, this isn't exclusive to poker. It happens to entrepreneurs, to those starting new relationships, to those changing careers. The rush to succeed too quickly destroys any chance of succeeding for real. Alfredo, little by little, began to understand that losing is also a move, as long as you know what to do with the loss. And that's when something started to change, even if imperceptibly. Even while losing, he was more attentive. He started caring less about what others said, and more about what he needed to understand. He stopped trying to impress and started trying to learn. This shift in mindset, though subtle, was the first step toward a new cycle. The cycle of consistency. The one where the goal is no longer applause, but progress. Where the pain of a fall becomes a tool. Where frustration becomes fuel. And where the jokes become the backdrop to a journey that's just beginning. The lesson here is simple, but profound. No one reaches the top without facing the bottom. Alfredo fell hard. He was humiliated, discouraged, underestimated. But all of that was serving a purpose. It was like a forge, heating the iron before it's shaped into a sword. He just didn't know it yet. And this phase, which seemed like the end, would be exactly what would prepare him for what was to come. Because soon he would make a decision that would change the course of everything. And it would be this decision, fueled by every fall, every doubt, every night of frustration, that would put him back at the table with something new in his eyes. Conviction. There are moments in life when everything seems to invite you to give up. The falls pile up, self-esteem hides, and your mind starts looking for excuses to stop. For Mr. Alfredo, it was no different. After so many losses, so many jokes and looks of disdain, he found himself at a crossroads. The urge to quit was real, and no one would have blamed him if he had dropped the deck and returned only to the domino games in the square. But it was, on one of those silent nights, sitting at the kitchen table, that something inside him spoke louder. A small but stubborn feeling that said, "You haven't given it your all yet." It may sound like a cliché, but that sentence nudged him inside like few things had in recent years. It wasn't a grand decision. There were no speeches, no soundtrack. It was one of those internal commitments, made with your head down, but your heart in your hands. Alfredo decided that if he was going to continue, it would be to take it seriously. If he was going to play, then he would study like never before. If he was going to fall, he would fall trying something better, not just repeating the same mistakes. So he changed the game off the table. He began to note every play in detail, not just the hands, but also his own impulses. I bet high out of vanity. I raised just to make a point. I folded too early because I was insecure. He started seeing poker as an extension of himself, and that made all the difference. On top of that, he decided to do what many don't. Go back to the basics. He reread the old books, returned to the forums, and looked for new content. He found an online course that taught opponent reading with a focus on body language. It seemed like nonsense to most, but he saw it as a powerful tool. After all, he was already good at observing. Now he just needed to refine that gaze. He also watched the tournaments with a different perspective. He paused the videos, noted behavioral patterns, compared decisions. The old man who once only saw the game as entertainment was now becoming a true analyst. And the more he delved into it, the more he realized how many young players overlooked important details out of pure arrogance. While most relied on talent and ego, Alfredo relied on consistency. He understood what few understand. Talent is great, but discipline is what holds everything together when talent fails. And as he would say, talent is good to get you to the table, but the ones who stay until the end are the ones who know how to adapt. And he adapted. He started noticing patterns, not only in the plays, but also in himself. He knew when he was acting on impulse, when he was going on tilt, when it was his pride talking. This made him colder, sharper, and that scared the others, because he no longer showed obvious signs. He played quietly, firmly, with eyes that seemed to see beyond the cards. It was during this rebuilding period that Alfredo heard about a local tournament. Nothing huge, but it had an official entry fee, a cash prize, and of course, better prepared players. He hesitated, but the desire to test his progress spoke louder. He signed up without telling anyone. He wanted to go alone, no fans, no pressure. On the day of the tournament, he arrived early, with a deck in his pocket and the old notepad in his backpack. He sat at the table for the first round and did what he knew how to do. He observed. He played with patience, paying more attention to the others than to himself. And it was with that calmness that he advanced to the next round. No big plays, no flashy moves, just being precise, focused, and above all, consistent. That qualification, though small, was a turning point. It showed him that the decision not to quit was starting to pay off. It showed that he could compete as long as he stayed true to the process. He didn't need to be spectacular, nor draw attention. He just needed to play well, with his mind in the right place. And from that point on, the spark reignited with strength. Because when you prove, even if it's a small victory, your whole body wakes up. Your mind starts believing again. Your blood starts flowing. And Alfredo felt it like a breath of life. A clear sign that he was still in the game, and that he had much more to show. More than winning, Alfredo wanted to evolve. He wanted to surpass himself. And honestly, that might have been the biggest turning point of all. Because when you stop playing to prove something to others and start playing to prove something to yourself, that's when everything changes. The way you look at things changes, the decisions change, and inevitably, the results change too. That old man who used to be the butt of jokes now began to cause a subtle discomfort at the tables. Some started to notice that he didn't make mistakes like he used to, that he was more focused, that his plays made sense. He wasn't a standout, yet, but he was no longer invisible. And this transition, from being underestimated to being observed, was what started something much bigger. If you ask any experienced player what the most memorable tournament of their career was, it's likely their answer will involve a combination of three elements: fear, overcoming obstacles, and a twist that no one saw coming. For Mr. Alfredo, that moment came without fanfare, without special announcements, with no one really expecting anything from him. The truth is, the day before the event, most of the players didn't even know he would be there. He was just the old man from town, the same one many saw playing for fun at the local club, the one who still made mistakes with his bets just a short while ago. No one took his registration seriously. To the other players, he was just another name on the list, one who would likely be eliminated in the early rounds, with all the respect given to a kindly grandfather trying something new. The tournament in question was traditional, gathering respected players from across the region and always attracting a few well-known names in the local circuit. It had a considerable prize, online coverage, and of course plenty of attention. It was a showcase for anyone wanting to be seen. The semi-final table, which Alfredo somehow made it to, was made up of familiar names. People who had won multiple times, who played with sponsorships on their shirts, and who seemed to breathe poker 24/7. Alfredo's presence there caused discreet smiles, whispered comments, light-hearted jokes laced with disguised contempt masked as kindness. "Look, who made it far? I really respect his courage. Maybe he'll get lucky, right?" These comments, said in a mild tone, hid a cruel truth. No one, absolutely no one at that table, considered him a threat. And that's where the twist lies. Because while everyone was focused on each other, calculating the moves of the big players, the one who went unnoticed was precisely the one who was paying the most attention. Alfredo didn't laugh, didn't drink, didn't move much. Sitting upright, with his eyes half closed and calm breathing, he observed. Every nervous tick, every betting pattern, every hesitation. He wasn't just playing, he was reading. Like someone studying a book they've read before, but now noticing details that had been missed. The hand that turned the game around began like any other. No one noticed what was about to happen until it was too late. The most aggressive player at the table, a regional champion known for his constant bluffing and provocative style, made a bold move, trying to grab the pot with nothing in his hand. The others hesitated. Some folded. But Alfredo, with an almost paternal look, stayed calm. He didn't have the perfect hand, but he had something much more valuable in that moment: emotional reading. He knew. He didn't suspect. He knew it was a bluff. The guy tried to intimidate with words, raised the pot with chips, used the discomfort tactic. But Alfredo didn't flinch. He calmly pushed his chips into the center of the table. All in. The silence was immediate. The crowd went quiet. The other players froze. The bluffer laughed, thinking he had won with his audacity, and called the bet. When the cards were revealed, shock. Alfredo didn't have the best possible hand, but he had enough to win. And above all, he had nailed the read. Clean, dry, and surgical, he unraveled the plan of the most feared opponent at the table. The reaction was a mix of surprise and collective shame. The bluffer, once confident, lowered his gaze. The other players, who had been laughing among themselves, exchanged worried glances. That wasn't luck. That was skill. That was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and who until then had been underestimated by everyone. That moment was the turning point of the tournament, not just because of the value of the chips or the elimination of one of the favorites, but because, right then, discomfort was born. The tension shifted. Now Alfredo held the psychological advantage, and he used it masterfully. He remained calm, didn't get excited, didn't celebrate. He just adjusted his chips carefully, as if to say, another hand. But everyone at the table knew the game had changed, and this was no longer just an ordinary tournament. Now there was a new player in the spotlight. A player no one had expected. An old man with a soft voice and a sharp mind who had just delivered a lesson without raising his voice. This play, more than a successful move, was a living metaphor of true mastery. Alfredo didn't need to be the fastest, the loudest, or the most aggressive. He needed to be the most attentive. And in that moment, he was. And that exact moment when he read the bluff like one reads an old face in the mirror, was the instant when everyone fell silent. The crowd, the players, even the commentators. An old man who, to the world, should have been resting, had shown that intelligence isn't measured by age or resume. It's measured by presence, by reading, by precision. And the most curious part? Alfredo didn't celebrate. He didn't cheer. He just smiled subtly. That half smile only someone who knows exactly what they're doing can give. He knew there was still more game to be played. But at that point, he had already won something bigger than the tournament. He had won the label, the distrust, the mockery, and perhaps, more importantly than anything, he had won over his own fear. The truth is, no one was prepared for what happened at that table. The silence that followed Mr. Alfredo's play wasn't just a silence of surprise, it was a silence of reverence. The champions, used to dominating the table with almost arrogant confidence, lowered their heads, as if, For a moment, they had been reminded that the game doesn't forgive those who misjudge an opponent. And that day, they all had misjudged. They had underestimated a man who, unlike them, didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And precisely because of that, he proved everything. It was as if the noise of the world had been put on pause. No laughter, no sarcastic jokes, not even a nasty comment. It was as if poker itself, in its purest essence, had stopped to pay respect to a true player. Then came the gesture no one expected. Mr. Alfredo, with his usual calm expression, collected his chips without making a fuss, carefully stacked them in front of him, and simply said, "Good hand, huh?" It was like a whisper cutting through the fog. There was no irony, no provocation. It was just a mature, almost generous acknowledgement of the greatness of the moment. A comment that, coming from anyone else, would sound pretentious. But from him, it carried wisdom. Here was a man who played for passion, not ego, who won without stepping on anyone, who understood the game as a reflection of life. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but in all cases you learn. And the truth is, in that moment no one was on the same level as that man, no one. The eyes turned to him. Eyes that had previously ignored him, that had treated him as background, now sought to understand. Who is this guy? It was as if a veil had been lifted. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know more about that quiet player with steady hands. Some whispered, "Has he played tournaments before? Does he have a professional background? Where did this guy come from?" The truth, as you already know, is that he came from silence, from discipline, from patience. Qualities that, in the fast-paced and vain world of competitive poker, are often overlooked, until they become impossible to ignore. The transformation was immediate, but not just in the tournament. Something deeper had happened. Alfredo went from being the nice old man to becoming the symbol of an uncomfortable truth. The game doesn't belong to the loudest, but to the one who listens best. He became the mirror of what many feared, that their certainties could be undone by someone who had never been on their radar. And this rattled everyone emotionally. There were, of course, those who felt envy. But surprisingly, there were also those who felt genuine admiration. Because deep down, every player who loves poker recognizes a true master, even if he's wearing a simple shirt and a pair of worn shoes. What was most impressive was how the champions themselves changed their behavior. The tone changed. The "I am" comments changed. No one mocked him anymore. No one spoke condescendingly. On the contrary, there was respect in every glance. And respect, when earned in silence, tends to last longer. Alfredo's posture began to influence the way the others played. The table became more serious, more focused, less noisy. It was as if he had set a new frequency, and everyone adjusted to it without realizing it. That's how real leaders act, without needing to raise their voices. To those watching from the outside, it seemed almost poetic. An ordinary old man, coming from a quiet life, transforming a competitive environment with nothing but emotional intelligence, humility, and precision. But to him it was just a natural consequence. He wasn't there to teach anyone. He was there to play. But the truth is, without even trying, he taught more in that one move than many books and expensive courses could ever teach. He taught that presence is worth more than appearance, that consistency is worth more than forced confidence, that listening and observing, two often forgotten skills, can be the greatest weapons at a poker table. And in life, the impact of this transformation extended beyond the table. When the game ended, several players approached him, some with technical questions, others with simple admiration. And there were those who just wanted to shake his hand, not for what he won, but for what he represented. Because deep down, everyone knew. Alfredo had won much more than a hand. He had won an entire system of superficial judgment. And my friend, there is no trophy that can represent that. But perhaps the most beautiful part of all of this was his very attitude towards it all. He didn't inflate his ego. He didn't change his tone. He remained himself. He tucked his notepad into his backpack, thanked the compliments with that subtle smile, and walked away with the same calm as someone heading out for a coffee in the late afternoon. That transformation, for him, wasn't a revolution. It was a confirmation. A confirmation that everything he had lived through, from the failures to the silent notes, had brought him exactly to this point. And that right there, in the epicenter of a game everyone thought he wouldn't understand, he had become what everyone wished to be, someone absolutely present, conscious, and respected. But the story doesn't end here, because what happened after that moment, well, that took his name far beyond that hall. And what was once just fleeting admiration would soon become, in no time, a living legend in the circuit. After that night, Mr. Alfredo's name stopped being just a detail on the registration list. It became a reference. In the bar chatter, behind the scenes of tournaments and even in online groups, a new nickname started circulating: the Silent Challenger. The nickname came as a quiet compliment, almost poetic, reflecting exactly what he was. Someone who didn't need to impose himself through the power of his voice, but through the solidity of his actions. And that's how he went from being underestimated to a symbol of respect, not just for one play, but for everything he represented: consistency, focus, patience, and above all, a living proof that intelligence doesn't have an expiration date. The impact of that play went deeper than anyone imagined. It didn't take long for his story to spread among the older players, and even among the younger ones, who started to see poker in a new light. It wasn't just about bluffing, stacking chips, and looking confident anymore. It was about having presence, about listening to the game. And even more than that, it was about keeping your mind sharp, even when the whole world tries to convince you that you're already out of the game. Many men of his generation, who once thought they weren't cut out for this anymore, started returning to the tables. Inspired by Alfredo, they began studying, dedicating themselves, and even competing on equal footing with players who could have been their grandchildren. And the most beautiful thing was that he never intended to create this legacy. It was all a natural consequence of someone who chose to commit to what they love, without needing to prove anything. He kept visiting the same places, with the same friends, sipping the same coffee. But now, when he walked into the club, he noticed something different. The glances had changed. They came with respect, with admiration, with the curiosity of those who know they're in the presence of someone who has lived more than they've played, and who plays with more awareness than haste. And in every new game, Alfredo taught more, not with words, but with gestures, with posture, with decisions that revealed a deep understanding not only of the game, but of people. Over time, even the tournaments began to treat him differently. He was invited to speak in discussion circles, mentor beginners, and participate in celebratory tables. Some young players asked for tips, others just wanted to hear about that play. He never placed himself as a master. He would just say, "You only learn when you lose with attention." And maybe that's the biggest lesson he left behind, because his legacy wasn't built on victories, but on the way he turned every loss into an opportunity to grow. The final lesson, which echoed even after the lights went out, was simple and powerful. Age doesn't define intelligence, and a sharp mind always finds its moment. Those who laughed at him in the beginning now tell his story with pride. And those who doubted him now look more carefully at who they underestimate. Because Alfredo didn't become a legend by chance. He became a legend because he was patient enough to wait for the right moment and wise enough to seize it when it came. And perhaps what's most talked about today is not even the play itself, but the way he did it. The way, after everything, he just smiled and said, "Good hand, huh? Now tell me honestly, have you ever underestimated someone at a poker table and then deeply regretted it? Have you ever had that moment when you realized you were looking at someone or a situation just by appearance, only to discover too late that there was so much more beneath the surface than you could see?" Yeah, everyone's been there. And Mr. Alfredo's story is a painfully elegant reminder that when we judge someone too early, it's almost certain we're letting something valuable slip right through our fingers. Maybe the most curious thing is that, at some point in life, all of us are the old man at the table, the one who's ignored, the one who fails a few times, the one who needs to prove, first to themselves, that they still have something to offer. But the truth is simple and powerful. You don't need anyone's approval to grow. You just need the decision to keep going, even when no one believes, especially when no one believes. And if you've made it this far in this story, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what's your impossible tournament? In what area of your life do you feel discarded, doubted? But deep down, you know you've still got one brilliant move left to make. And if there's one thing Alfredo's journey teaches us, it's this. The play of the century doesn't need to come with loud cheers. It can come in a whisper. It can be discreet. It might even seem invisible to those not paying attention. But when it happens, no one forgets. So I ask you, what's the craziest move you've ever seen or made, coming from someone no one gave a chance? Tell me in the comments. Let's create a space for stories that deserve to be told. Because maybe your play, the one that turned you upside down and repositioned you at the table of life, could inspire someone who's about to give up.